There is a version of the Joan Crawford story that everyone knows. The wire hangers, the daughter who wrote a book, the reputation for cruelty that Hollywood carried for decades after her death, like a piece of luggage nobody wanted to claim. That version of the story is not false, but it is incomplete in a way that matters, because it starts at the end and works backward. And in doing so, it misses the thing that makes Joan Crawford one of the most extraordinary self-creations in the history of American culture. To understand her, you have to start at the beginning, the real beginning, not the premiere, not the Oscar, not the shoulder pads and the painted mouth and the eyes that could strip paint at 20 feet. You have to start with a girl named Lucille LeSueur in Lawton, Oklahoma in 1904, who had nothing. Her father left before she had memories of him. Her mother remarried a man who ran a small theater, and the family moved constantly, following whatever work existed in the marginal spaces of early 20th century American entertainment. Lucille scrubbed floors at the schools she attended in exchange for her tuition, because there was no money for tuition. She waited tables, she did laundry, she worked with the matter-of-fact thoroughness of a child who has understood, earlier than children should have to understand it, that nobody is coming to save her, and the only question is what she is going to do about that. What she did about it was dance. She had found in movement and in performance something that the chaos of her childhood could not touch, a space where she was entirely in control, where the work she put in produced results that were visible and real, where she could be seen on her own terms, rather than the terms the world had assigned to her. She danced with ferocious dedication. She entered competitions. She won. She moved to Chicago, then to New York, dancing in clubs and revues, working her way towards something she could not yet name but could feel, the way you feel a destination before you know its address. MGM signed her in 1925. She was 21 years old, and she arrived in Hollywood with a face that the camera immediately understood was extraordinary. Not the soft, yielding prettiness that the studio system preferred, but something harder and more architectural, with cheekbones that cast their own shadows and eyes that contained a watchfulness, a permanent assessment of the room that made her simultaneously compelling and slightly unnerving. She was not by nature a person who relaxed. She was a person who was always working, always calculating, always 3 steps ahead of the situation she was in. The studio renamed her. A fan magazine ran a competition to choose the name, and Lucille LeSueur became Joan Crawford, a name she reportedly disliked but accepted with the pragmatism that defined every professional decision she ever made. She was not sentimental about identity. Identity was a tool. You used it or you changed it, depending on what the moment required. The 1920s made her a star. She danced, she charmed, she played flappers and shopgirls and young women on the make, and the audience recognized something in her that went beyond the roles, a hunger, a vitality, a sense of a person who wanted things with an intensity that the screen could barely contain. She studied the stars around her with the attention of a student who intends to surpass her teachers. She watched how Greta Garbo moved, how Norma Shearer handled the press, how the machinery of stardom was built and maintained. She took notes. She applied what she learned. She was, from the beginning, not just a performer, but a student of the phenomenon of being a star. And she was perhaps the most dedicated student that phenomenon has ever produced.
MGM in the 1930s was the most powerful studio in the world, and Louis B. Mayer ran it with the conviction that he owned the people on his payroll, body and soul. He was, in many respects, correct. The studio system gave him control over contracts, images, public personas, and private lives in ways that would be unimaginable today. Most stars navigated this system by compliance, by charm, by the careful management of the relationship with the man at the top. Joan Crawford navigated it by making herself indispensable. She worked harder than anyone. She was on set before the crew, knew her lines better than her directors, understood the technical requirements of filmmaking, the lighting, the angles, the relationship between the camera and the human face, with a precision that most actors never bothered to acquire. She cultivated relationships with cinematographers and insisted on specific lighting setups that had been developed over years of trial and observation to show her face at its best. She understood that the camera was not simply recording her, but collaborating with her, and she treated that collaboration with the seriousness of an engineer. She also understood, with a clarity unusual in an industry that runs on illusion, that a movie star is a brand, not in the cynical, contemporary sense of the word, but in the fundamental sense, a set of associations, expectations, and promises that the audience carries with them into the theater, and that the star either fulfills or violates. Joan Crawford spent her entire career managing that brand, with an attention to detail that would be recognized as genius in any other field. When the flapper era ended and the audience wanted something different, she changed, not by abandoning herself, but by finding the next version of herself that was also true: the working woman, the survivor, the woman who had come from nothing and was not going to pretend otherwise. Mildred Pierce, in 1945 at Warner Bros., was the role that proved definitively what she had always known about herself. She played a woman who builds a restaurant empire from scratch, who sacrifices everything for a daughter who despises her, who is destroyed and rises and is destroyed again with a resilience that is not triumph, but is something more honest than triumph. It was the performance of a woman who knew exactly what it cost to build something from nothing, because she had done it. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress. She was reportedly too ill to attend the ceremony, and there are those who believe the illness was strategic, a way of managing the expectation and the potential disappointment. Whether or not that is true, what is true is that she received the Oscar in her bedroom, in full makeup and dressed impeccably, propped against pillows for the photographers, and she looked in every photograph from that morning like someone who had always known this moment was coming and had been ready for it for years. The relationship with Bette Davis, her great rival, her nemesis, the other side of the coin that Hollywood minted when it needed a complicated woman, was the most famous professional enmity in the history of the industry. They despised each other with a creativity and a commitment that generated headlines for decades. What Happened to Baby Jane in 1962, in which they starred together, is one of the most bizarre and compelling films ever made, precisely because the animosity between them was not performance. The camera caught it because it was real, and the audience sensed that they were watching something that existed below the level of acting. Joan Crawford was not easy to love. This needs to be said, because the story of her rise is extraordinary, and the story of what the rise cost her and cost the people around her is also real. She was controlling, demanding, capable of cruelty, shaped by a childhood that had taught her that softness was a liability she could not afford. She adopted 4 children and loved them in her way, which was a way that contained real devotion and real damage in proportions that her daughter Christina would later describe in terms that the world found impossible to ignore.
But there is a danger in letting the end of the story consume the beginning and the middle. Joan Crawford's legacy has been filtered for decades through the lens of Mommy Dearest, through the wire hangers and the night rages, through the image of a woman who was monstrous in private while performing perfection in public. That image is not invention, but it is not the whole truth either. The whole truth includes a girl who scrubbed floors for her education, a young woman who arrived in Hollywood with nothing and studied the machinery of stardom with the attention of a scientist, a performer who reinvented herself, not once but 4 times across 4 decades, remaining relevant and bankable and vital in an industry that discards women the moment they stop being young, with a casualness that amounts to institutional cruelty. A woman who, when MGM dropped her contract in 1943 after labeling her box office poison, did not retreat or collapse. She moved to Warner Bros., found a better script, and won an Oscar. She understood something about survival that most people only understand theoretically, that reinvention is not a luxury, but a necessity.
that identity is not fixed but chosen, that the person you decide to be is more powerful than the person's circumstances assigned you at birth. She had been Lucille LeSueur, the girl who scrubbed floors. She had been Joan Crawford, the flapper. She had been Joan Crawford, the working woman. She had been Joan Crawford, the Oscar winner. She had been Joan Crawford, the Pepsi Cola board member, because after her fourth husband, the company's CEO, died, she took his seat on the board and ran it with the same ferocious competence she had brought to everything else, not because she needed the money, but because she was not a woman who sat still. She died on May 10, 1977, in New York City at the age of 72. She had, in the last years of her life, become increasingly reclusive, a woman whose public image had been so perfectly constructed for so long that the gap between the performance and the person beneath it had become, perhaps, impossible to bridge. She was a woman who had built herself from nothing, and the building had been magnificent, and the cost of the building had been real. What she left behind is this: proof that origin is not destiny, that the floor you scrub is not the floor you end up on, that a woman with nothing but ferocious will and the intelligence to apply it systematically can construct herself into something the world cannot ignore, not by waiting for permission, not by being what the system wants her to be, but by understanding the system well enough to use it before it uses her. She built the table herself, then she sat at the head of it, and she never, not once, apologized for either.